Brought to you by Head Start Basketball.
If someone were to reach out to me and say, hey, what's the best way to get to college and be a college head coach? And I immediately start with two things. You got to be willing to move anywhere in the country at any time. That's the first thing. And you got to basically be willing to work for nothing.
Duane Sheldon is currently the athletic director at Dublin-Coffman High School in Dublin, Ohio. Sheldon began his coaching career in North Olmsted, coaching 8th grade basketball for one season before getting an opportunity to become the head coach at Midpark High School in Middleburg Heights, Ohio at age 23. Duane led the Meteors to a 78-42 record over his 5 seasons at Midpark. Sheldon left Midpark to return to his alma mater, Baldwin Wallace University, as an assistant coach for 3 seasons, where he worked for his college coach, Steve Bankson. At age 31, Duane took over the men's basketball program at Heidelberg College, winning the program's only OAC title in school history during his tenure. Sheldon once again returned to Baldwin Wallace in 2008, this time as a head coach, and led the Yellow Jackets to a 98-83 record before heading to Dublin-Coffman. As a player, Duane played shooting guard at Baldwin Wallace from 1989 to 1993 after graduating from Strongsville High School. Hey Hoopheads, I wanted to take a minute to shout out our partners and friends at Dr. Dish Basketball. Their Dr. Dish shooting machines are undoubtedly the most advanced and user-friendly machines on the market. Sign up now for their Virtual Camp 2.0 featuring 10 days of workouts with pro trainers from the Dr. Dish family. Learn more at drdishbasketball.com and follow their incredible content at Dr. Dish B-Ball on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Mention the Hoopheads podcast and save an extra $300 on the Dr. Dish Rebel, All-Star, and CT models. Visit drdishbasketball.com for details. That's a great deal, Hoopheads. Get your Dr. Dish shooting machine today.
Hi, this is Matthew Raidbard, author of Lead Like a Pro, and you're listening to the Hoopheads podcast.
If you're looking to improve your coaching, please consider joining the Hoopheads Mentorship Program. We believe that having a mentor is the best way to maximize your potential and become a transformational coach. By matching you up with one of our experienced mentors, you'll develop a one-on-one relationship that will help your coaching, your team, your program, and your mindset. The Hoopheads Mentorship Program delivers mentoring services to basketball coaches at all levels through our team of experienced head coaches. Find out more at hoopheadspod.com or shoot me an email directly, mike@hoopheadspod.com. Follow us on social media at hoopheadspod on Twitter and Instagram, and be sure to check out the Hoopheads Podcast Network for more great basketball content. Prepare like the pros with the all-new Fast Draw and Fast Scout. Fast Draw has been the #1 play diagramming software for coaches for years. You'll quickly see why Fast Model Sports has the most compelling and intuitive basketball software out there. For a limited time, Fast Model is offering Hoopheads listeners 15% off Fast Draw and Fast Scout. Just use the code HHP15 at checkout to grab your discount, and you'll be on your way to more efficient game prep and improved communication with your team. Fast Model also has new coaching content every week on its blog, plus play and drill diagrams on its Playbank. Check out the links in the show notes for more. Fast Model Sports is the best in basketball. Be sure to take some notes as you listen to this episode with Duane Sheldon, Athletic Director at Dublin-Coffman High School in the state of Ohio. Hello and welcome to the Hoopheads Podcast. It's Mike Linsing here with my co-host Jason Sunkel. And tonight we are pleased to welcome a longtime friend, Duane Sheldon, to the podcast. Duane is currently the Athletic Director here at Dublin-Coffman High School in the state of Ohio. And Duane has an extensive amount of experience as a basketball coach, both at the high school and the college level. We're going to dig into all that. But Duane, probably long overdue, but thanks for coming on. Really appreciate it and look forward to digging in with you.
Thanks, Mike. It's great to be on and looking forward to it. And looking forward to talking with you and Jason tonight.
It's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to start by going back in time to when you were a kid. Tell us a little bit about your first experiences with the game of basketball, what you remember. What are some of those earliest memories that stick out for you?
Yeah, so growing up back in Strongsville, Ohio, which obviously Mike, as Mike knows, he was a year ahead of me. And, back then you played everything. You played all the sports. And I would say my first experience with just in sports was my dad was a football coach at Midpark High School, and I was always the ball boy. And then he had a few years of being assistant basketball coach and was a ball boy there. And then, as you know, Mike, in Strongsville, you get involved in that Saturday morning program. And even though you're playing all the sports, you're playing baseball, football, basketball. I just remember, I think the first 2 years being in that Saturday morning rec league, whatever you wanted to call it. I think the first year we won the championship, and then the second year we might have won it again with a loss maybe. The first year we were undefeated. And so I caught the fever. I love the intensity. Obviously the winning helped. That's probably the early, as far as growing up, and still liked all three sports. But I think really the thing that gravitated me towards basketball, and Mike, you had a lot to do with it. When I got into my 10th grade year in high school, I think there was only three of us. This sounds crazy. I think there was only three of us that played three sports in my class. If I recall, Darren Tracy, I don't know if you remember Darren, and Chaz Gannon.
Yep.
And Chaz, I believe, was soccer. He wasn't football. But other than that, in a school of Strongsville size, where we had, over 2,000 students, I just remember being out on the football field my 10th grade year and all you guys in the gym. and I love the games and football and everything, but just the practices weren't the same. And man, I was jealous. And I remember I went in on a Monday night open gym, and the football coach came through the gym and pulled me out of the gym because it was football season. And and that kind of, made my decision to stick with basketball. And really through high school, if you remember, Mike, we played all the time. We played every
Absolutely.
single day. And especially, I guess, it would be going into, your junior, going into your senior year, my 10th grade year going into my junior year. It feels like, man, if we weren't at an open gym, we were at the Omni, we were at the courts behind the library in Strongsville. And when I mean every day, I'm talking every day. Like maybe Fridays we took off because there was a Friday night football game, and I think we even worked out in the afternoon before we went to the games. So I think it was the love of sport, and then being, I guess, at the right place at the right time, as far as being surrounded by some great players like yourself and some other guys that just had that same love of the game and the passion. Just kind of flowed, it kind of flowed, and it just became an expectation that this is what we're going to do. And we're going to do it all the time, and we're going to get pretty good at it, and we're going to compete.
I think it's a great point that you make, just about sort of being in the right moment and the right place at the right time. And you think about where Strongsville basketball was back in the time when you and I were there, and there was obviously success before that, and then there was success after it. And as we had a great run as a, probably certainly in the Cleveland area, but one of the best public school, high school programs during that late 80s, early 90s run that Strongsville had, and just the amount of players that came through there. And then you think about just the guys that went through that ended up coaching, and, the coaching tree, and people who are still out there having success. When you think about Mac at Brunswick, and obviously Darren had a lot of success, and just, it's amazing when you think about just what the program was. And I think you hit on one thing that I really think had a lot to do with that success, and that's the rec program. Nowadays, obviously, most people scoff at what our rec programs, not our rec program meaning Strongsville, but just in general, what rec programs across the country and a lot of places have become. And as you said, you think about how important that was to your development or to my development, and just connecting us to the older guys in the program when we were kids. And then conversely, I always say I had as much fun when we got to be high school players and then turn around and coach the younger kids. And I think that's something that, to me, is those are some of my best memories, is that time. And then you think about the time that we went down and we kind of had that rec. I don't know if you call it an all-star team or whatever that Coach Casey put together.
Oh,
And
yeah,
took us down to Wadsworth,
yep.
And I still have that team photo
Yep.
floating around somewhere at my house, and it's funny to go back and you look at that, and there we were probably maybe, I don't know, fifth and sixth grade, I don't remember, but it was all, you look at that team photo, and it's kind of like you could predict, okay, who are my high school teammates going to be? Well, here they are. Or some of those guys ended up gravitating, becoming some of the better athletes and playing other sports.
Right.
But it's just funny to look at what that was like back in that time, because it's totally different the way kids grow up today compared to the way you or I grew up in the game, coming up and through the program at Strongsville, and just as you said, playing so much pickup basketball. It's just I don't even think kids can do that anymore, even if they wanted to.
Yeah, I don't know where they go to do that. I mean, it's a good and bad thing. I think the good thing is there's more basketball facilities. Like, the reason we were doing it is, unless a coach was organizing an open gym, you couldn't get into a gym. Like, and we were fortunate that I'll never forget it. And I think it was your idea. Hey, let's all join the Omni. Let's go to the Omni Fitness Club, which guaranteed us an open gym every night that we wanted to. And I think Coach Casey was smart enough to realize, hey, we don't have to get too crazy with our open gyms. These guys are playing every night against men. But other than that, like, unless you had a coach across town or that was going to open up the gym on Tuesday nights, you had to go outside and play. And now I think there's, as you guys know, there's more basketball facilities out there. I just think it's obviously the AAU thing and all the travel tournaments and everything. And I don't think that's a bad thing. It's just a different kind of way of developing and growing up in basketball.
Kids certainly, I think, have exposure to better coaching. Now, that's with a caveat that not every coach that they're exposed to at a young age are always the best coaches. But for the most part, you think about how you learned the game or how I learned the game. You were doing that on your own with your friends, as you said, playing against, especially as you got to be a middle school, high school player. Maybe you got an opportunity to break into a game with some adults and play against people who were older than you, and maybe they weren't as talented of basketball players, but when you're 14 and you're playing against somebody who's 28, the difference in the strength and that kind of thing just makes a huge difference in a kid's development. And yet at the same time, in this system that we have today, kids just get better coaching, and they get that earlier. And I think I don't necessarily know the fundamentals, but certainly the knowledge of the game for kids today at an earlier age in terms of just understanding the fundamentals, I think is better than it was when we were younger. But I don't know if kids have the same level of creativity because they're not playing that free play the way we did.
I would agree. And not to jump off basketball, I would probably, what you just stated would probably be, you can relate that to any sport.
Yep.
Just the level of coaching and the skill development. And, back when we were in high school, we made a decision to specialize in basketball. That was not real common at that point. I think ours was a lot to do with, hey, if you wanted to play, you had to get pretty good because someone was passing you up in a school of over 2,000 students. And unless you're a freak like Tommy Martin was, where, just an unbelievable athlete, he could show up, not touch the basketball for months and still zoom by everyone and strong enough to finish and all that. There wasn't too many of those guys, and there probably still isn't. But, I think you can specialize in anything today. And, I'm kind of jumping off to another idea, but as a high school AD, I tell our coaches all the time, you have to be really careful. I think when the AAU thing first started, and I'm talking AAU because we're in basketball, talking about basketball, but it could be club baseball, it could be club volleyball. You have to be really careful because I think initially coaches are like, oh, you're learning bad habits, AAU, and you're doing this, and your coach doesn't know what he's doing. we got to be careful because in a lot of cases, in most cases, the AAU or club product is better. It really is, especially as they're growing up. Like you said, they get better coaching. And really, I think what we're hanging on with basketball is you get to coach them every day in high school. At least you get to coach them all week, every day.
Yep.
Where in AAU basketball, because of usually travel and other conditions, maybe you're twice a week if you're lucky. Once you get rolling into tournaments, if you can find one day a week where everyone comes, that's great. But it truly is going back to, I think as an AD, everyone says, well, kids should play as many sports as they can in high school. It's a great experience. And okay, that's fine. But if you do that at a place like Strongsville and Dublin-Coffman, you're not going to probably be a top player in one of those three sports. Like, you might be a role player in all three because someone else is specializing and they're passing you up. And it's where, years ago, that statement was true. Play as many as you can. And still, God bless you, if you can do it, you're talented enough to do it. Absolutely. But there's a reality that I don't think people want to grasp and accept, that it's okay if someone wants to specialize in baseball 12 months out of the year. It's okay if they want to do that in basketball. It's okay if they want to do that in volleyball, because the hard work, the competitive situations they're put in, all that still is there. And like you said, there's more opportunities now than there was when we were growing up.
There definitely is. And I think that when I look at that situation, I always think about whether or not that specialization or that decision to play one sport, does that come from the kid, or does that come from a parent, or does it come from a coach sort of forcing that on the kid? And I think ultimately, if the kid makes the decision, you think about, there's you back as a 10th grader playing football and being like, man, I like these games, but I'd much rather be at open gym than be at football practice. So then you make a decision. And to me, I think when the kid makes the decision to specialize or to be a 3-sport athlete, whatever it is, or be a multi-sport athlete, I think ultimately that's where you end up with the best outcomes. I think sometimes, whether that be a high school coach potentially, whether that be a club or travel coach putting pressure on kids, that's where I think we get into that slippery slope of, are we forcing kids to specialize too early? And you make a great point that, look, at a big high school, and I'm talking anywhere across the country, if you're at a big high school that's going to have more than 1,000 students in it, you're going to have a really hard time. You better be a really talented athlete to be able to play multiple sports, because so many kids, as you said, are playing year round. I just think that one of the things we got to make sure that we're doing is making sure that it's kid driven and that's kid centric, and not necessarily for the benefit of the adults, or the adults aren't driving that decision, if that makes any sense.
It absolutely does. And I'm excited for the kids today because they do get more opportunities than us. But in the same breath, one of the things we talk about, we have that meet the team before every season. It's required by Ohio High School Athletic Association. And one of the things I talk about, because parents, and here's the reality, and if you want to call it, I don't know if it's the ugly side of it, but because parents are paying thousands of dollars, and really their lives are a lot of times built around their kids' tournaments. I don't care if it's baseball, volleyball, basketball. About the only thing they don't do that off-season stuff is football. Everything else, you have an off-season. And because of that, and because they're specialized training, and because they're playing for their club, and because parents are spending thousands of dollars, the acceptance of roles, specifically when we talk about like basketball, that's tougher to convince kids today than it was 20, 30, 40 years ago, because there is such an investment, and there's a time investment, there's a money investment, there's a family sacrifice. You can't go see grandma as much as you like to. You can't, because why? Because you're playing in this tournament I'll never forget, my grandma turned 90 at one point. This was years ago, and my dad's like, well, hey, give me a weekend where JC or AJ doesn't have a tournament. And I'm not kidding you, Mike. This was in this was like March where he asked me. Yeah, and I laughed, and I was like, yeah, end of July.
That's about right.
It's crazy, but because of that investment and sacrifice, it's harder for kids and parents to accept the role. And I can't blame them. It's kind of human nature, right? You're putting all that time and money and effort and travel into it, and then your coach is going to tell you, well, that's great, but you just set screens for my cleansing, and you go rebound, and if you dribble, you're coming out, and if you shoot, you're never going back in the game. That, like, geez, if you told a kid that nowadays, he'd quit before practice started.
Be at another school tomorrow, right?
Yeah, right. And I think you just made a good point. You can relate it to the transfer portal in all the sports in the NCAA. Like, there's not too many kids that want to take on that role. So what do? They go in the transfer portal and they hope to find that role in another institution, in another program. And a lot of times they go down a level to find that. Or when I say down a level, it could be from a Power 5 to a mid-major, or from a Division I school to Division II school to find that role that they would prefer to play. And I think it's just the reality. And it's something that, I don't think it's going to get any better anytime soon.
No, that cat is out of the bag for sure. I don't think that's changing, and and you can understand. I mean, I can understand the value in the transfer portal when you think about for a long time, sort of the unfairness of the system, that a coach can take off and walk out the door at any moment, and as a player, you were locked in, and if you wanted to transfer across, to an equal level or higher, you had to, you got to sit out. It just, you could see where that was perceived as being unfair. And yet at the same time, I can't even imagine trying to be a college coach and navigate the whole system of, I think about it from the perspective of, you talked about players transferring down, but then you also have the same epidemic of players that, you come in, you go to a mid-major and you have a good year. Let's say you come in as a freshman, you average 13 points a game. And now all of a sudden, well, why wouldn't I go and try to go to a Power 5 school where those schools are like, well, this kid's already proven he can adapt to the college game. He's already adjusted to school and the social piece of it and being away. And now that kid who might have been at a mid-major for 4 years, and by the time they're a senior, man, you've really built a good team as a mid-major coach. Now you get those guys that develop early and they're kind of diamonds in the rough, and all of a sudden, after their freshman year, their sophomore year, they start looking around to see if there are greener pastures for them to be able to move up. And, then you have the carrot at the end of the rainbow here that just, hey, I want to be able to play professionally and get paid. And there's so many more opportunities now across the globe for players at all levels to be able to do that guys who maybe in years past wouldn't have been able to chase that dream. Now it's a lot easier to chase it for sure.
Right. And you think, does Mike Cleansing stay at Kent for all 4 years? Who knows?
Who knows? You don't know. You don't know. Yep.
Especially your junior, senior year, you were good enough to play in the Big Ten if you really wanted to. For whatever reason, you wound up at Kent and you had a great career. But nowadays, geez, you were a 4-year starter at Kent. By your junior year, you might have said, hey, I'm going to go play for Purdue. Like that
right.
system fits
you just don't
me.
know.
That coach,
right.
Yeah. And so, but no, it's, and then, so being a former college coach, I think to myself, one of the things as you get a little older and you form opinions, and I would do this, I would do that. Well, I always try to put myself in that position of the person I'm commenting on. I don't know if like a lot of these sportscasters or so-called experts, former players, former coaches do that enough. They just talk about things and it's like, come on, think about what you're really talking about here.
Right.
And my point is, so if you're a Division I college basketball coach, do you try to make everyone happy to keep as many people around, or do you just say, the heck with it, I'm going to coach the same way I always have, and people that aren't going to be happy, and they're going to leave, and I'll get other transfers in. And then, there was some instances, I know, like Syracuse women's basketball, I think, 13 out of their 14 girls transferred.
Yeah, exactly.
So he gets fired. Like, you're not keeping your job if 13 out of 14 transfer. If you have, you might not keep it if half transfer. So then can you coach the way you want to coach, or do you have, like, there's a lot of levels to it. And I guess the money these guys and ladies are making, maybe that's the way it goes. But but it's definitely different, no question about it.
Trying to navigate that, I can't even imagine, again, especially as it's brand new and trying to figure it out. And look, yeah, as you said, I think ultimately one of the things that, from talking to lots and lots of coaches at all different levels, I think one of the things that you just said is, can you coach the way that you want to coach? And I think ultimately, if you're going to be successful, you have to coach the way you want to coach, right? If you start compromising what you believe in and start bending rules and start bending over backwards to accommodate people, and it's not what you believe in, it's not the things that you should be doing, I mean, ultimately, I think you get yourself in trouble if you don't coach the way you want to coach.
I agree, Mike, but I will say this, and we talk to our coaches about this all the time. You have to stick to your core values. You have to coach what you believe, but it is different today.
It is.
You can't
right.
coach the way you coach, like the way you and I were coached. Those guys don't last.
Correct.
Like guys and girls won't last if they coach it. Now, I will say our high school coach, Bob Casey, I think was ahead of his time as far as how he handled people. I thought that was his biggest strength. I thought he was great with people and young student athletes. And I think he'll be the first to admit he wasn't the greatest basketball mind, but he knew how to handle people. And there's a lot of guys that are and coaches that were the opposite. We're unbelievable basketball minds and football minds, but we're bad people. Couldn't handle the people part of it, and those guys have no chance today. None.
Right? Yeah. The relationship piece of it has become so much more important. Not that it wasn't important back in the day, because I think the coaches that understood it was important back in the day were the ones that really were able to utilize that to be able to have success and have an impact on their kids. But yeah, today there's no way you can get through
Bobby
a career,
Knight,
a season.
No
yeah,
way.
right.
There's
yeah,
no Who would go play for him right now?
Yeah,
There's
all you
way.
have to do is go back and read. I don't know when the last time you read Season on the Brink is.
Oh no!
But I read it or reread it like 2-3 years ago, and I remember being flabbergasted when I read it back when it first came out. But you read it in the context of today, and you're just like, oh my god! Like I can't. Like the guy wouldn't have lasted 30
weeks.
seconds.
Yeah.
He would have been immediately. And obviously, it's a different time, and Knight obviously had his.
Part of it was though, Mike. During our era, you go home and you complain about coach, and coach said this, coach said that, and it's mom and dad said, yeah, okay,
right, exactly.
Go back tomorrow. Guess what? You're playing. You're doing what he's saying.
Right, and
it was
and
just
most
the way
of the time
it was.
you never and most of the time you never said anything.
Right, exactly. Because it was coaching. It was sports, and but it's not that way anymore. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I really don't.
I agree. No, I agree with you.
I think some people say, well, that's soft. Kids today aren't as tough. I think it's just society. I don't think it's just sports. It's just across the board. It's a different time, and people are going to be a little bit more sensitive, and maybe they should be. Maybe relationships and stuff, the way you handle people, maybe it is more significant in our society, and maybe it should be. But we talk about that with coaches, and the other part of it that I really harp on is you can't be coached the way you were coached, because that doesn't mean it was right, and you have to keep up with new strategies. I don't care what sport it is. And now, we're talking basketball. The stuff that was being done 10, 15 years ago is still being done in some spots, and you can see flashes of it. But if you haven't paid attention to basketball in the last 10 years, I mean, you're way behind. You're way behind.
The game has completely changed, and I'm sure you can echo these sentiments, but I can probably count on one hand the number of screen and rolls I was involved in as an offensive player and a defensive player through 3 years of varsity basketball and 4 years of college basketball. I honestly think maybe I got to maybe I got to 10 times maybe in my career. So that's one piece of it. And then the other part of it is I can tell you honestly that I never drove to the basket and threw the ball backwards behind me outside 2 or 3. Now maybe you're driving baseline and you find somebody in the corner accidentally because it was just the last bastion of, hey, I got to get the ball somewhere. But certainly it wasn't a strategy. So those are two things that when I watch the game today, I'm like, those are two things that I basically never did. And I was a college basketball player, and I never did either of those things. It's just incredible the way the game has morphed and changed into what it is today.
And now they call that a drift pass. Like they teach that. They teach that. Right. You know, and I'll one up you on it. Like, if kids today saw the way we played and we had 2 post players, they'd be like, "What is that? What is going on? Like, what's a high low? What? You know?" And I'm not saying they should go back to that. I mean, it's funny if you watch when you talk to some old timers. Well, that big guy should be down on the block, and they need to throw it down low more. And I'm thinking, yeah, they will, and they probably lose. Like you'd be happy, but they'd lose because the other team's spreading out, knife into the hole, and shooting threes, and you think that big guy should touch it every possession on the post, and it's like, you know, it's a different game. When was the last time you saw? I call it the Dwight Howard syndrome, and you look back to when Dwight Howard was still one of the best players on his team, and was making the playoffs every year. Besides 1 year at Orlando, I believe, they would make the playoffs. They would throw it to Dwight Howard. He would get 38 and 25 boards in the playoffs, and they could not win a game, whatever team he was playing for. And people would say, "Oh, geez, he's not getting any help." And it's like then people start to figure out, well, they're fine with Dwight Howard getting those points, and then they follow him when it really counts, and he can't make free throws, and the other team doesn't even have a post player, and they're their traditional post player, I should say, and you know they're knifing them up and moving and cutting and shooting threes and driving, and you know, when was the last time an NBA champion, you know, had a post guy, a true post guy that they went through? And I don't call Giannis isn't a true post guy. Like when I say true, a throwback post guy. You know, I guess Tim Duncan maybe.
Yeah, Olajuwon.
Yeah, like Olajuwon in that era, and then Tim Duncan more in the recent era. But even then, you know, when they were winning it late in his career, they were more guard based than they were throwing it to him. But those are things that, you know, not only in basketball and other sports, you have to keep up with the trends or you're kind of left behind. And, you know, it goes back to kids are getting better coaching too. And that's probably why we're able to play those different styles, because there might have been 3 kids on your team that could dribble and shoot.
Right. Exactly.
And now with skill development and all these opportunities, you usually have a lot of kids that can do that, and rightfully so.
Well, you don't have every team back when you and I were playing had the 6'2", 215, 220-pound football kid.
Yep.
Every single team had that player, and now that player's a dinosaur. I mean, those guys, every once in a while you'll see a kid like that, but for the most part, those kids are out of the game. Even the 12th player on a high school team, the skill level that they have. Now, this doesn't mean they have a good basketball IQ or that they can actually play out on the floor, but if you just watch them shoot or handle the ball, again, compared to, like, I look at the things that kids can do with a basketball today, handling the ball, compared to what I could do, and I was a decent ball handler back in my day, but I look at what kids can do with the ball today, and I mean, it doesn't even compare.
With those moves didn't exist.
They didn't, and they were a lot of them were travels. If you would have tried any of that stuff, you'd been called for carrying the ball or traveling back in the day. So again, it's the evolution of basketball, and as you said, it's something that it's going to continue, and it'll be interesting to see where the game goes. And players are just going to keep getting more and more and more skilled, and there's going to be changes in the coaching profession and changes in how the game's played as we learn more about it and more smart people come on board and start figuring things out and looking at it. And players obviously are creative, and the things that that guys can do today are just things that you and I could have never imagined doing during a time when, back when we were playing. Let's go back in time. Let's go back to high school. So 2 questions. So one, I'm just curious on this one, just your favorite high school memory, and then after that, we'll jump into your decision to go to BW.
Boy, favorite high school memory. I'll be honest, it's probably your half quarter to beat Brunswick. It's probably yours, I'm sure.
Yeah, for sure.
And Mike has that on VCR.
Oh,
just so you know.
It plays on. It's playing on loop right up here in the corner of the screen, Dwayne. It just runs on loop. So
it's got to be on YouTube now. It's got to be like it's got to break a record on YouTube. But that was probably basketball moment. Obviously, we could talk about maybe a moment that didn't happen for other reasons that would have been. I'm sure.
Yeah.
Your last high school game.
Are you talking about? Wait. Are we bringing up the foot on the line thing? Is that what we're talking about?
I don't even want to bring it up. I'll be honest, because this will turn into a really. We might
be here the rest of the night.
It's like our version of the Zapruder film going on here.
I might drop some swear words and I'll get very disgruntled. So. Yeah, I mean, I really believe, Mike, it's probably that half quarter against our rival in a packed gym, and that was to win it, and that was something really special. And, back then you're just playing, right, and you want to compete, and you want to win, and all that stuff. But as far as a specific moment, that's probably it. But the reality is, as we all know, that it's probably the best moment and the best the thing that you take the most out of it is the relationships you build.
Yep.
And the hanging out. I mean, us going to the Omni every night, hanging out, being silly, being stupid, talking silly, talking stupid, and then just
which still is happening.
Yeah, I mean, never grow out of that, I guess. But just the relationships and the time you spent with your brothers is I think, for me anyway, high school and college, that was. That was the most memorable experience, and that's what I took the most. As far as going to making the decision to play at Baldwin Wallace, actually, as much as I put into the game, I remember after my last game, my senior year, I wasn't sure if I wanted to play. I was going to go to Ohio State, go to school, just be a fan, and then after, I'll never forget it. After a couple weeks, I'm like, geez, oh man, I got to keep playing. And went on a few visits, I think Otterbein, Mount Union, and Baldwin Wallace. Well, my dad went to Baldwin Wallace. My grandfather went to Baldwin Wallace, and I'm thinking, I'm not going there. It's only 15 minutes from my house, 20 minutes from my house, but I'm going to go anyway. The assistant coach recruited me pretty hard. All right, I'll go check it out. And spent the day there and absolutely loved it. And it was the right fit. And, best decision probably I've made besides, marrying my wife, was that decision to go to Baldwin Wallace. And great institution. Had a great experience there, playing with some just super people, not only great basketball players, but even better people. And just really, when it came down to it, wanted to keep playing. Still didn't even care. I'm thinking, I don't know what I want to do, but I don't want to be a teacher. That's what I kept saying. And I just wanted to play hoops. And all right, I'll take a business class. I'll do this. Well, within 2 years, then I want to be a teacher. So, but as far as the decision goes, it just felt right. It was the right timing, the right place, and great experience. And it worked out, I'd say, for me.
Absolutely. Did you, at what point, so was coaching, obviously with your dad having a coaching background, was coaching on your mind at all, like while you were at Strongsville? Were you thinking, hey, at some point, maybe I'd like to get into coaching? Or was it a case where you were so focused on being a player that the teaching part of it, the career part of it, the coaching part of it was not even on your radar?
Yeah, I'll be honest. I'm going to reference that Saturday morning rec ball situation where not only you remember as a player, but you referenced it earlier about then when you become a high school player, you coach those little kids. And that was probably my first real experience. But through high school, I really wasn't thinking I was going to be a coach. It was probably once I got to college and I thought, this is what I need to be doing. This is my calling. And so probably early in my college career, I was convinced that, yes, I'm going to be a coach someday. And everything I was going to do to become a teacher and to become a coach was focused, and that was the path I was going to go. But I wouldn't say in high school I was thinking that. We were just hooping and getting better, right? I mean,
Yep.
but it's funny that I reference that mental maturity all the time with the coaches at Dublin-Coffman, and they say, well, this kid's thinking this way, and this kid thinking, do you remember what you were thinking when you were 16, 17, 18? Because I can't even remember what I was thinking. Like, I can't remember half the things that went on.
Just wanted to play basketball, right?
Yeah,
I mean, that's the honest truth.
Yeah, when's the last period, and when could I go home, get a snack, and take a little break, and then head and go hoop for 3 hours. That's all I was caring about. But I mean, once I got to college, it definitely, then you start to be aware. Okay, what offense are we running? What's the defensive philosophy? What did Coach Casey teach us when we were playing in high school? I wasn't paying attention then. But
Right.
Like now, okay. And then, geez, what did I do in middle school? What was Jeff Eicher when I was playing for him as a freshman? Like, man, he did some good things. And now I'm in college and I'm going to become a coach myself and using some of that stuff that you learn throughout your time. But I guess everyone has a different path and different timing and different things that lead them to what they're going to do. But I think in college is when I made up my mind.
Were you clearly leaning towards at that point being a high school coach?
I always wanted to be a college coach.
Okay.
And the reality was, if you were going to graduate and be able to make some money, you're better off going to high school. Like, people don't understand that, and that's still very true. And if someone were to reach out to me and say, hey, what's the best way to get to college and be a college head coach? And I immediately start with two things. You got to be willing to move anywhere in the country at any time. That's the first thing. Because it's not like you have, 50 high schools or 50 colleges in a, in a small radius. You got to be willing to move anywhere, anytime. And you got to basically be willing to work for nothing if you want to climb that ladder and eventually go to college. I bet 90% of the guys you're watching on TV coaching now will tell you that's how they started. And so people, they want the glory, and then they think about that. It's like, oh man, I don't know if I want to do that.
I don't know if I want to do that for 5 or 6 years,
right?
Which is what it takes.
Right? That's
what it takes.
Exactly. And a lot of times, that's why you get a lot of these coaches that I firmly believe the best coaches in, the country are probably high school coaches. A lot of them are. They don't have the talent that the college coaches have, and, they have to figure out ways. And so, kind of got off on a tangent, but I always wanted in the back of my mind be a college coach, but I knew that high school was probably the best route to get started, and was very fortunate to get a head high school job basically the second year after I graduated from Baldwin Wallace. So
talk a little bit about how that came to be, and then we can dive into what that first experience was like for you as a head coach and just how you put together the way you wanted to build your program. But let's start with how you got the job.
So my first job, if you remember your AAU program, you stuck Rob Persani and I on a team. We went up to Appleton, Wisconsin.
Absolutely.
I remember coaching that.
We had the red and white jerseys.
There you
red
go.
Red and white, if you remember.
Yep. I just remember having to take my teacher's exam. I think I had to go to Alliance, Ohio, take it at Mount Union. They're like 8 a.m, and by noon I was back in Strongsville, loading up a van and taking these kids to Wisconsin.
Isn't it funny when you think about that now? So that was what, 93, 94, somewhere in there.
Yep.
And I remember even in the midst of me doing it, and that was like basically, I mean, it was pretty much pre-AAU.
It was just getting rolling.
Pretty much. And I look at it, and I can remember trying to organize those teams and trying to find like a practice site.
Oh, gosh,
and clearly it was so much different. I just remember how difficult it was to be able to put together that one team. I mean, it was almost impossible. And I remember how much of a struggle that was, and thinking, God, this is never going to work. Like there's no way that this thing is ever going to amount to anything. And then after a year or two, just kind of, walking away from it, and then boom, within 2, 3, 4 years, it was like the whole thing had exploded. But we talked about it earlier. There just was no gym time. Like you couldn't calling up a school and say, hey, I want to just bring a group of random outside kids in here to practice in your gym. Like that just was, nobody was doing that at the time. And
it's still a struggle. It's still a struggle to find gym time, but
it is
not like it was back then.
In a different way. Now there's so many people vying for it that it's just not available. Back then it was like there was tons and tons and tons of gyms that were just sitting empty, but nobody wanted to let anybody use them, which didn't make any sense either. So continue. Sorry.
Yeah. So my first year, I actually got hired at North Olmsted Middle School, and I was like a hall monitor / cafeteria monitor / full-time sub, disciplinarian. It was actually a great experience. And I coached 8th grade basketball. Steve Lepore. I don't know if you remember Steve Lepore that played at St. Ed's.
St. Ed's.
Went to Northwestern and Wake Forest, and is now actually, I don't know if you know that, he's coaching down at Eastern Kentucky as an assistant basketball coach, Eastern Kentucky University. But that was his 8th grade year at North Olmsted. That was my first job. And then Midpark High School, Carl Ludwig, who was coaching there for a few years, decided to retire. And I think he even did it. Maybe even in June. He decided to hang it up. I had already been hired by Brecksville Broadview Heights City Schools to teach at the high school and be an assistant basketball coach. That happened in like May of my senior year, or no, May, it wasn't my senior year, it was May of the year that I was teaching or had that position at North Olmsted Middle School. And then all of a sudden, Coach Ludwig hung it up, and they had an opening, teaching opening, and they approached me and said, hey, are you interested in coming over here? We talked to Coach Ludwig, like he might go one more year if you come over, and you're a young guy, and when he'll retire a year from now, and then you'll take over. And I'll never forget it. I said, hey, I'm not trying to play hardball, but I'm not making a lateral move to be an assistant coach. Like Brecksville hired me 2 months ago, and I'm committed to them. If you want me to be the head coach, I'm all in. Let's go through the process. And basically, it didn't put pressure on them, but it was really like, hey, I understand. If you don't think I'm ready, I'm good with that. That's fine. But I'm not leaving Brecksville to come over here just to be an assistant. And I'll never forget Terry Krivak, the superintendent. I sat in his office, and he said, here's my biggest concern, Duane. He said, your first few years, you're going to have a terrible experience. And of course, I'm young at this point. I think I'm 22 at this point, and I'm like, oh no, we're
going to win. We're going to win right away.
Man, we'll figure it out. We'll work harder than everyone. We'll play better defense. We'll figure it out. And he interrupted me. He goes, no, Duane, you are going to stink for 2 years. And his concern was, this is your first experience as a coach. You're going to be terrible. I know the talent you have. Like, the parents are going to be a problem. And somehow I convinced him I can handle it. But he was right. We were pretty bad. We had trouble dribbling the ball up the floor. And I think we were 4-17. And I don't know how we won those 4 games, but I remember telling my wife, we're not getting a Christmas tree until we win a game. We were at Cloverleaf, December 22nd. That was our first win. and she was relieved that we were able to get a Christmas tree after that. But then the second year we went 500, and then we had a decent class that I believe were 10th graders that we went 14-8, and then 18-4, and then 21-2. The last couple of years we were one of the better teams in the state, and I remember that I think that 18-4 year, that's when Logan and Clancy and Lepore won the state title at St. Ed's. We didn't eventually play them in the tournament, but we scrimmaged them, and we battled with them pretty hard. But boy, they were like a college team. They were really good. And then the next year we were 21-2 and one of the better teams in the state. And that really was just giving those kids the opportunity to get better. Because I remember, Mike, when we were in high school, we had to go find places to play, and then even more importantly, you got to find places to work on your game.
Yep.
You know, I mean, working on the game. I mean, I don't even know if those courts are still behind the library.
They're not.
That's Target. They're in the sports section at Target right now.
Now it's the library. Now it's not the courts behind the library. Now the courts are the library.
Oh, what's going on? What's wrong with Strongsville? They're building libraries. They should be building bigger courts. All right, but anyway,
no courts, man. The outdoor courts do not exist anymore.
Yeah, but I mean that's where you put your work in, riding your bike up there, and you know, and I did too, not as much as you, just because I was a little further away, and then your driveway and all that. So really what I thought the difference was when we took over at Midpark was we gave those kids an opportunity every day to get better, working on their game and playing. We just, you know, they just got better through just hard work and the opportunity. We felt like, boy, we were giving them more of an opportunity than most coaches in the area were doing it. And as a result, as you know, as a coach, you can only coach so much. You got to have the guys that can play.
For sure.
And so, I mean, you know, I think when people ask me what was the biggest key to that success, timing's always important, where you have the right kids, the right class, the right talent. I would say two things: building a culture of hard work and expectation and setting a standard, and then giving them the opportunity to reach that standard and that expectation was our biggest key to success there. And, you know, as you remember, you know, Midpark was a football school, you know, and they had some good teams even before we got there, some championship teams too. But we really just got the excitement, didn't take anything for football, but just got the excitement about playing basketball and getting better and packing those gyms. And it was, I can remember that like it was yesterday. We had some, and I can argue maybe the best team I've ever coached, everything being relative, might have been that last year at Midpark when I coached those guys. I mean, they were, you know, obviously some college teams were better, but as far, you know, if they matched up head to head, but I'm talking just everything being relative. Yeah.
Relative to their level. Yeah, for sure.
It was just they were a blast to coach, and boy, they worked their tails off. Great passing team. They had skill. They had athleticism. It was just a fun experience, but it was more about giving them the opportunity to get better. And the other thing I'll say about that, I'm not sure at any time in my coaching career, went against better coaches than that old Pioneer Conference. Like, people have no idea how good that league was. Like, you know, Mike, you played in it, and then, you know, during that time when I was coaching, geez, oh man, the Medinas, the Brunswicks, the Strongsvilles, and then we got it going in Midpark, and boy, it was just a battle, like it was when we were playing. I think your senior year, Mike, if I remember correctly, we might have had 6 teams in the district out of our conference. Like,
sounds right. Yeah, that sounds right. And I just think about the sheer number of guys that went on to play college basketball. When you go You
Oh
take my
gosh,
senior
yeah.
year, and then you go the next 2 years. So say when I'm a senior, that
Yeah.
sophomore, junior, senior class of
Yeah.
that, as you're talking graduates in 88, 89, and 90,
Yeah.
the number of guys that went on to play college basketball or college football or whatever, just there was just a ton of
Yep.
great basketball in that era. It's hard to imagine that, again, just how good it was back at that time. It really was a league that was loaded with high level players and high level athletes, kind of up and down the board.
Yeah. And then when I was coaching, the coaches in the league were unbelievable. I mean, it was, you talk about a crash course in coaching and getting out coached and having to figure out a way to compete. Those first 5 years of my coaching career, I felt like I saw every defense, every offense, everything known to mankind that a coach could throw at you. And so that, that's a compliment to the guys we were going against, but it really shaped me as a coach as well. I had no choice. You either had to figure it out or you were going to get beat.
What's something that you were bad at to start with, or something that you struggled with initially out of the gate that you feel like as you went along in your career that you got better at?
In two things. Personally, for me, was delegating. I was not a good delegator. I felt like I had to control everything, and learned that more my later years of coaching. When I say that, when I got to college, and then you have kids of your own, you have your wife, your kids, like you can't do everything. So that was a long time coming that eventually I learned to delegate. But specifically on the basketball court, I would say there's a lot of different ways of doing it. I think, we were going to play man-to-man. Boy, if we got a ball screen, we were going to hedge hard, and we were going to get up in their shorts, and we're going to be on the line, up the line, and take away passes, and we're going to, because that's the way to do it. That's the best way to do it. We're going to run this offense. We're going to run motion offense. We're going to run this set, and that's the best way of doing it. And, it still worked for us. Don't get me wrong. It was successful. But I would say what I wasn't good at is realizing, you know what? You can throw a few possessions of zone in there. To me, that was soft. Like, yeah, we're not giving them anything. We're going after, and
Yeah, I had that same mentality.
Yeah, and so I think it's a young coach, not just a basketball coach. And, what worked for you as a player, what didn't work for you as a player. Your high school coach, your college coach did this. It didn't work. I'm not doing that. And, and then, what they did, it was successful. You liked, you take. But I would say, just being young and inexperienced and realizing there's a lot of different ways of doing things. And even now in the position I'm in, as an athletic director, that's probably, in my opinion, one of the things that I understand probably the most, maybe compared to other athletic directors, is, hey, I'm a basketball guy, and I can tell you I do these 100 things when I coach this team, and I'm watching my daughter play for 4 years, and now my son in his senior year, and thinking I would do this, I would do that. That doesn't mean it's the best way. I mean, there's 100 different ways of doing things, and they all could be right, and they all could be the best way, and that's the beauty of sport, and that's the beauty of coaching. But I think that would probably be the thing that stuck out in my head when I was young, that I felt like this is the way we're going to do it, and I don't care what anyone else says or thinks. This is the way it's going to be, and it did work for us, but we probably should have been a little bit more flexible and done some different things.
Where did you go during that early part of your career to learn? Did you have mentors, guys that you talked to? Did you go back and talk to Coach Bankson? Did you reach out to other young coaches? Were you studying video? Just what did you do to try to improve yourself and increase your knowledge of? Because again, I think about myself, like I knew what Coach Casey did.
Yep.
I knew what Coach McDonald did at Kent. And so when I got my first job as a JV coach at Bay, guess what I did? What those two guys did. That was it.
Exactly.
That was it. I didn't really do anything else. And I was young and probably stupid and probably a little bit egotistical and probably didn't put in the time that if I look back on it, I'm like, man, I should I should have put a lot more time in becoming a better coach and just instead of just focusing on, well, I already know a lot. And I think when you're young, that's kind of the way you look at it. Now as a, whatever, I'm 51, almost 52, and you realize like, I don't really know anything. It's just, it's incredible how much more I thought I knew when I was 22 than I do now.
Yep. And, that's a great question because that was a different time. Obviously now you can go on a computer and get just about anything. As far as what coach's philosophy, what offense you want to run. I think the fact my last few years of playing in college, I knew I wanted to coach. And I can't tell you how many college games we would go over at BW. It's called the Hive. The cafeteria closed, 6:30, but the Hive was open to 11. And that, we didn't have cable in the dorms, thank goodness, or I probably wouldn't have a college degree. People, you tell people like that now, they can't believe it. I mean, you had 358 and channel 43 and 19 or whatever. That was it. That's what you had in your dorm room. And actually, that's probably what you had at home too until we got to middle school or high school. But anyway, we go over to the Hive, and if you remember Big Monday, they had they had the Big East playing at 7 and the Big 10 at 9, and then I don't know if it was Tuesday or Wednesday. You had the Big 12, and we would watch all those games. And I really would watch it as a coach. I really would. Like, what are they doing scheme wise? What are they getting? And so to answer your question, I probably took more things from Coach Casey than I did from Coach Bankson. Playing at Baldwin Wallace. And that's not a slight to Coach Bankson. Obviously, what we did there is even at a higher level than we did in high school. And he was a great X and O's coach, Coach Bankson. And we ran some different offenses my time there and learned a lot. But I think my personality was more like my high school coach. And so I took a lot of things that we did in high school probably more than college. But in saying that, how I learned and how I got better was coaching clinics, those coaching Nike clinics that, remember at Independence there.
Independence, Holiday and Independence.
I didn't miss those things. I was at every one of those, and I knew who I was going to listen to, and I knew what they were talking about. And then back then it was, you order those VHS tapes, those coaching clinic tapes when you really find someone that you really like what they're doing and it fits your personality and your comfort zone, you study that. And I remember I loved what Kansas did and what Roy Williams did. I taped his games on my VCR at home, and I would watch their games and break down what they were doing offense. I broke down their secondary break before I even knew that existed. Like I had it figured out. Then I saw them in a clinic, and it's like, oh my gosh, like I had about 80% of it figured out. But oh man, that's a lot easier the way he explained it. That kind of thing. So it's just a combination. And then I remember going to watch Dan Hipsher at Akron, watch his practices, and different coaches. Coach Waters at Cleveland State, and you just try to find places that'll let you observe and sit down and talk with you. I know, even when I remember, going to Coach Izzo and watching their practice, and he spent an hour with us after practice, just talking about his philosophy and his war room, and so a little bit of everything, I guess, is the answer to that question, Mike.
It's so true. I mean, I think that coaches then and now, I'm amazed the number of guys that will end a podcast with us and say, hey, if you're ever in town, you want to come down and you want to check out a practice, and kind of leave it as an open invitation for coaches to come out and be able to watch and just take part in the practice and see what's going on. And I think that learning piece of it's one of the things that, I don't know if it was surprising to me, but after we did the podcast for a year or two, just how open people are to share the things that they do, and whether it comes to culture or whether it's X and O's, or just saying, hey, you can come in and take a look at what we do. And it's really hard to keep secrets. It's one thing in the VHS, VCR era, you could keep things away from people. Nowadays, it's pretty much impossible. Everything's out there for everybody to see. So I think it's kind of opened up for coaches to be willing to share, which is, again, I think it's something that is a positive for the coaching profession. It's a positive for the game. It's a positive for the players who are playing it. Let's move from Midpark to you going back to college basketball and getting an assistant job at your alma mater. Obviously, you have a tremendous amount of success at Midpark at a young age, and you've been now at that spot for 5 years. You kind of, as you said, you wanted to start out and be able to make some money. So what was the thought process? How does that opportunity at BW come your way?
Always wanted to be a college coach. So that was always in the back of my mind. And so, okay, don't have any kids. My wife and I are both teaching, both coaching. I'm going to try to do this college thing. And I remember it was interesting. Bruce Pearl was at Southern Indiana, Division II school. He's, a top 5 team Division II every year, and he had an opening down there, and I threw my email resume. That was just, boy, you were just starting to learn how to do that then.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'll never forget it. He called me. He's like, here's the deal. I got a grad assistantship or a part-time. Well, I had already got my master's, and he says, he says, you're kind of overqualified because you've already been a head coach, but, I want the best guy. And 2 days later, I was down in Southern Indiana interviewing with Bruce Pearl. And make a long story short, Laura came down with me, my wife, and we spent more of the day trying to get her a job down there because he knew the only way this was going to work is if she got a teaching job down there because he wasn't going to be able to pay me enough money. So to make a long story short, that didn't work out. And that's okay. I mean, and then I said, well, I want to coach college. Coach Bankson let me help out for a couple of years. And great experience being on the other side of things after you play for the guy was just awesome. It was awesome. And then was lucky enough, the Heidelberg job came open. And, boy, I think I was 31 at that point. And I think their top 2 candidates they offered turned them down. Because I remember I applied, and about a month and a half later, I got a call from the AD say, hey, you still interested in this job? So I could read between the lines that I think they had an alumni that they thought was going to take it. It was good. He was already a college coach, and he turned him down. And then they asked another guy. They turned him down. And so, hey, I don't care how I got the job, but I got it. And so I was basically their third choice, process of elimination. But heading out to Tiffin, Ohio. After JC was, I believe, about 3 then, and we actually, AJ was born. I lived with the AD out there for I think 2 months. My wife was really thrilled because she was 8 and 9 months pregnant, and I was in Tiffin, Ohio.
You're still married. You're still married though, man.
Yeah.
So you pulled through somehow.
Yeah. So it was. AJ was born, and we brought him basically from the hospital in Akron. He was born in Akron. We were living in Brunswick then, and we drove from Akron to basically from the hospital to our house in Tiffin. So and we're fortunate enough to, I was a young guy and 31 getting a job in that league. Boy, I mean, I was by far the youngest guy in that league. There was coaches that had been there for 20, 30 years. And I'm talking about the Ohio Athletic Conference, arguably one of the best Division III conferences in the country. And so, that was an adjustment. Once again, going there, coming from high school, being an assistant in college. So really, Mike, I was only assistant. Here's the piece that people would not believe if I told them. I think I was only assistant 2 or 3 years my whole life, my whole coaching career. And most people can't say that. I mean, I got hired really young in high school, and 31's fairly young in that conference. I don't know if that'd be thought of as young in today's world. It still would be. But it was an adjustment, and then you go and you think you know everything, and this is how I'm going to coach, and there's a shot clock in college, and everything you did in high school doesn't make sense, coaching. So now you got to readjust and learn things, and go through that process. But that was a great experience. We it took us a while to get going there, but the AD and the president were patient with us, and eventually it worked out. We're still to this day the only Heidelberg men's basketball team that ever won a championship in that league. They got a great team this year. They got a chance. I don't know if they're going to be able to get the regular season, but they have a chance to win the tournament. They have a talented team. But make a long story short, it worked out okay. It took us a while, but that was a great experience, and recruited some great players, and all those guys they're doing well out in their lives and their families as well too. So, living out in Tiffin, I think I was there for 6 years. Right time, kids were young, and all that good stuff. So, things happen for a reason, and you kind of fall into things, and it kind of shapes your whole story and your life and your family. And I can't complain about that at all. That was just a great move for us, and a great time in our life.
And then that led you to the opportunity to come back to Baldwin Wallace in 2008. And obviously it's your alma mater. It gets you back closer to your roots. You're not out in Tiffin. Talk a little bit about just how special it was to be able to take over your alma mater, and maybe just what your feelings were, what was kind of going through your mind as here's a place where you played, where you're replacing a guy that you played for, that you had also coached with. Just what was your feelings as you got that job, and how excited were you in that moment to be able to have that opportunity?
Yeah, there was a lot going on at that time. Our youngest, Emmy, who, I guess I can date it. She's 14 now. She was just born the last year in November, the last year at Heidelberg, and she has Down syndrome, and I'll never forget it. I was interviewing for that job in the parking lot of the Ronald McDonald House at University of Michigan Hospital, because Emmy was getting heart surgery at 6 months. So we were there for 10, 15 days, whatever it was. I remember the first interview was like a 5-minute interview, just kind of a screening process. Are you still interested? Here's the interview team, just a couple questions. My daughter just had heart surgery at 7 a.m. in the morning. This interview's at like 5, and I don't care what I say. I might have started the interview like, no offense, guys, but I don't care how this goes. I don't care if you like me, you don't like me. Hardest thing I ever do is hand our baby over to a nurse at 6 a.m. and you don't know how it's going to go. And now it's 5 o'clock and they're asking me questions. Yeah, whatever. Yeah, if you don't like it, fine. I'm going to go back and see my daughter. But so there was a lot going on there. And actually the second phone interview, 10 days later took place. There was only one spot in that McDonald's or Ronald McDonald House parking lot that I got reception. I was on my cell phone. And so I think the third interview was actually on campus. But anyway, great feeling when you asked me about what it feel like. Geez, I met my wife there. I mentioned earlier my grandfather went to Baldwin Wallace, played football. My dad went to Baldwin Wallace, played football. My father-in-law, Laura's father, Jim Lout, he was a college teammate of my dad's at Baldwin Wallace. They both played for Lee Tressel, Jim's dad, who around Baldwin Wallace is more famous than Jim, Lee Tressel, his father. So, it was just unbelievable to come back home and be the head coach at a special place that has been so special to you, to yourself and your family, and great experience, and wouldn't trade that for the world. That was awesome.
When you go in there, and Coach Bankson obviously has been there for a long time and has established what that program is, what it's all about, and you played for him, you coach with them. How do you go about putting your own stamp on it and trying to build and just continue the winning tradition that had already been established there. Do you think that was harder, easier than a place where you come into Heidelberg where you're trying to completely rebuild and retool? Just maybe compare walking in on the first day to the office and what you sort of saw in front of you at each one of those programs.
So I think if I had experience in anything, it was taking over programs and changing the culture. And it doesn't mean the culture was bad before I got there. It just means I was going to do things differently. And as you know, I don't care if it's business, coaching, whatever. When there's change, there's going to be some hiccups and there's going to be some challenges. I think I got pretty good at understanding some of the things you're going to go through. And the biggest difference with Baldwin Wallace was Midpark wasn't a traditional basketball power. Okay, you were trying to figure out, geez, we got to get respectable and turn it into a championship program. It's been, that didn't do that a lot at Midpark. And then at Heidelberg, they had never won a championship. And so it was, it was an uphill battle. The difference was when you took over Baldwin Wallace, they had a great tradition. And they'd been there before. And not that I don't want to say it made it easier, but there's a reason it was there before. Like, Coach Bankson did an outstanding job, but there was a lot of things in place there that weren't in place in the other stops that I experienced. So really excited about it. And Coach Bankson will tell you this, when I took over the program, it wasn't in a great spot compared to where traditionally it was. And so I remember my wife telling me, because I told her this through the rebuild of Heidelberg, that took years off my life because we were bad for a number of years before we made it a championship team. And I remember telling her, don't ever let me take over a program again. I don't care if it's high school or college where we got to rebuild the thing. I don't think I can survive it. I just don't. And so she was all excited, we could head back to Baldwin Wallace, and I was excited. And I remember her, before I accepted the job, her saying, all right, you told me never to let you take a position where you got to rebuild and start over. And she goes, you're leaving a job that's better right now than what you're taking over because of what we've built it. And I said, this is different, though. I said, this is different. This is like leaving, okay, Minnesota's been better the last 2 years, and you're going to Ohio State, and Ohio State's just been average. But over the course of time, Ohio State's a better job than Minnesota. There's nothing wrong with Minnesota, and there's nothing wrong with Heidelberg, but it's not Ohio State, it's not Baldwin Wallace, that kind of thing. And so it didn't take me long to think about that statement. And but, to answer your question, it is really about, believing in your standards and expectations and more importantly, getting your student athletes to believe in that and getting the right people involved. And obviously they got to play a little bit. They got to be able to play a little bit. And it's worked out at every stop I've been at, and that's really because I think if I did anything right, it's recognizing who can play and getting people you can count on when the going gets tough that has some talent, and I think that's a key.
How'd you identify those kids on the recruiting trail? Because obviously a big piece of that is knowing who they are before they even step onto your practice floor with you, that if you can recruit for that type of player that has that mental toughness, that is the kind of kid that you want to build your program around, it's a lot easier to bring those kids in who already have those characteristics as opposed to trying to instill them in a kid once they get onto campus. So just talk a little bit about what your recruiting process looked like and how you tried to identify the types of players that you felt would fit into what you wanted to do.
When we first took over Heidelberg, I wasn't very good at that. I wanted talented guys. I didn't care. Just give me talent. Now, we didn't go out and recruit criminals by any means, but just talented guys that, we get enough talent, we'll figure it out. Well, sorry, that ain't going to work because in that league, the guys you're playing against are talented and they're accountable, dependable people, and dependable, tough athletes. So what I think we got really good at Heidelberg was identifying what kind of guys and people would really like what we were doing. Yes, they have to be able to play, but I think we got good at that, and we honed in on those guys and really worked hard recruiting on those guys that we knew were tough. They were very similar to our personality, our work ethic. They would feel comfortable at Heidelberg. That's not a big city, big metropolitan area, but you get the right fit, and you recognize those guys, and they would like it at Heidelberg, and you go after those guys. And it's kind of the same thing when we got to Baldwin Wallace. I'm not going to lie, it's a little easier at Baldwin Wallace. So it's easier to find guys that would like it there and feel comfortable there. But you also have to find the right fit and the guy that's going to feel comfortable with your coaching style and your program. So to get really specific beyond that, I always tried to find guys when we're recruiting. I was a big, do they know how to play hard? Are they playing hard? Then I would look at what's their defensive concept. Like, is their coach teaching them good defense? Like, I don't think I'd ever recruit a guy that played zone his whole high school career. I'm like thinking to myself, he might be a great player, but he's not going to learn how to play it's going to be too late by the time he learns it. He's going to be a junior or senior, and it's probably not going to work for him. But those are little things like that. But to be specific on a basketball piece, I think today, and even when I was recruiting, the pace in which someone can play, I think, to me, is the most important thing. And I say pace, Mike, I'm not just saying from end to end. They can run, they can, they're fast. It's how quick do they pass it? How quick can they catch it and shoot it? How quick can they finish a layup? How quick do they get off the floor and rebound? They could be 6'8", but if they're a step slow jumping off the floor or sliding over, give me a 6'5" guy that jumps quicker than them. Give me a guy that makes a timely pass rather than a guy that makes the right pass that's a half a second late. I think that is the most underrated observation of a basketball player. And I think this at the level you played at. The speed in which things happen at Kent compared to Strongsville was night and day.
Yeah,
and then,
the ability to process.
And then you talk about the NBA. These guys that are so successful in college that can't even sniff the NBA because they can't do it at the pace in which it's done, and that you could be successful. So I'm not saying I wasn't the best coach, I wasn't the best recruiter, but those are some of the things that we really honed in on. And still today, when I'm watching even my son and daughter's team and teammates, I think, well, that guy or that girl, her pace isn't very good. It's going to be a struggle. Like, you can give them the greatest pass in the world. They might not be able to finish it or get the shot off or whatever. I'll give you a compliment, Mike. I remember playing with you. I remember telling our guys this when I coached, and I told this story over and over again from the times I coached high school, from the times I coached college. I remember when you came back from Kent, and we would play with you, and I would shoot unbelievable. And I would tell our guys this. I said, when I played with Mike Cleansing, I bet I shot 70% from the field. And it had nothing to do with me. It had to do with Mike's timely pass and where he put it. Like, I never played with a guy that put it in the pocket as fast as you did at the right time, where all I had to do was catch it and shoot it. And I'm not just saying that because, I'm on your program. It's true. And I would preach that to our guys, even in college that we were coaching. Like, you don't understand. I don't care if it's a drill, a shooting drill. We usually had guys passing to each other in shooting drills just because I emphasize that so much. And I don't know if you remember Jaron Crow. He was a great point guard at Menor, and then was a great point guard for us at Baldwin Wallace. I would use him as an example all the time. He was in our practice. I'm like, you guys don't understand. If we do any kind of partner shooting and it's for competition, you're crazy if Crow's not, if Jaron's not.
if you're not running over there, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
because he will make you better than you really are. And so, I kind of went off on a tangent on things there, though. But those are some of the things talking, I guess, relating back to the pace of play. Like throwing it at the right pace and catching it at the right pace and shooting it or finishing is just as important as anything to me when you're evaluating basketball players.
Yeah, I think it comes down to, and this is, I guess it's sort of a more high level sort of observation, but I think that if you know basketball and you sit down in the gym and you sit in the bleachers and you watch a game for 5 minutes, you can identify the kid who's a basketball player versus the kids who are just out there playing basketball. And obviously there's all different degrees of that. But what you're talking about making the pass at the right time, like to somebody who doesn't know or understand the game, like making that pass at the right time or making it a half second late doesn't really make that much of a difference to the casual fan. But to somebody who understands the game, whether that's as a player or as a coach, you realize how important that half second is and whether or not you make it easy for your teammate to score or hard for your teammate to score. And I just think that if you can find those kinds of kids, it just makes coaching so much easier, because those little things that are hard to coach. I mean, let's face it, it's hard to coach. Like, okay, here's the exact perfect timing when a pass has to be thrown. Like a kid has a feel for that or they don't. And it's just, I think that if you can find those kids, that's what's going to help you to be successful. And it makes whatever system you're running, whether that's offensively, defensively, a kid can process quickly, to your point. And then if they have the physical tools to be able to execute it quickly, then you have what can be a winning player. And that's what I hear you saying.
Absolutely. And, the first thing that just popped into my head when you say that, sometimes as a coach, you don't even recognize that on your own team until all of a sudden you say, okay, I'm going to play this guy instead of this guy. And man, things go a lot smoother. Like, What's going on? What's the difference? Oh, it's this guy I didn't think was good enough. And now all of a sudden he makes the right cut, the right pass, the right timing. He's always where, and that ball's moving, and it's, man, he makes us 10 times better. And he doesn't even making a shot. He's not even scoring. I think you hit it on the head, Mike.
It's interesting because I think there are players like that. I guess when I look at, you think of an NBA player like Lonzo Ball is sort of like that, where people thought as the number 2 pick in the draft that Lonzo was going to come in and be a superstar player. And he's obviously not that, but yet you watch him play and he's just a guy that the ball hits his hands and he moves it on to the next guy. I always say it's like, you can either be the guy making the fancy pass that everybody goes, ooh, but then the other 4 or 5 passes that you make aren't of any value, or you can be the guy that 5 times out of 5, you just keep the ball moving to that next guy. And that's really what keeps your offense flowing, or, a guy who makes the right rotation on defense and just is there in position every time where they're supposed to be. And that just makes your whole team defensive system so much more effective when people are making the simple reads, the simple plays, but they make them over and over and over consistently. And that's really when I think you really can have success.
And I think, Mike, even today's day, it's even harder to find those guys because so many guys and girls are more skilled and they put time in. And so they put all this time in and they work their tail off. They want to be able to do that on the court.
Right.
And I joked with our high school coach here at Dublin-Coffman. I said, you don't want to work too many guys out skill-wise. You know what? Because you don't want them all doing it. You want a few guys that never try it, because that's the way it's going to work. And back when we played, there were a lot of those guys because there wasn't not everyone was super skilled.
For sure.
And so that's a challenge, I think, for coaches at all levels now. It goes back to accepting a role and, hey, I go to this trainer and I've done this, and my parents have spent thousands of dollars going to all these AAU tournaments, and you want me to come in and just be a role player? Well, transfer portal and all that's, but it's real, but you hit it on the head. Those kind of guys help you win games.
And I think the other piece that goes along with what you said with the AAU and it kind of goes back to the beginning of our conversation is, everybody's looking for the next thing, and there are very few players, parents who are focused on, let me have the best experience that I can in this 5th grade AAU tournament, or in this 7th grade middle school game, or in this varsity basketball game, because everybody's trying to angle for the next opportunity. I want to be on a better AAU team. I want to make sure I'm a varsity starter when I'm a freshman. I want to make sure that I get this college scholarship, instead of being like, man, I want to have the most fun I can possibly have and maximize my experience as a high school player. And I think that's something that it's a challenge, because it goes to what you said, that people have spent so much time, money, energy on their kids' basketball career that everybody gets caught up in what's next instead of enjoying the moment. And it's hard to do. It's really hard to do.
Absolutely.
All right. We seriously have like 4 more hours to talk, but we are we are already up to close to an hour and a half, I think, if not well past that. So I want to end with this, and I think that we're going to have you back on to talk in more depth about it. But for those of you who don't know Duane's background, he currently has a daughter that we referenced several times that is playing college basketball at Ohio State and playing very, very well. Was recently named the Big Ten Player of the Week. And then his son AJ is going to play Division I basketball at Ohio University. And then he also has another daughter with Down syndrome. So he has a very unique perspective as a parent. So I want to just ask you, Duane, if you had one piece of advice for the parents of a high school basketball player, if you could boil it down. And I'd love to get into this discussion further, because there's a tons of things that I feel like are relevant for people that are out there listening, both coaches and parents. But if you had to boil it down to one piece of advice as the parent of a high school athlete, what would that advice be that you would give to those parents?
Boy, I can answer that a lot of different ways.
I'm sure.
I think, and this is tough to swallow for parents. And this is what we talk about with our parents, and this goes for every sport. If you have, don't get me wrong, you give your kids the opportunity, you give them every opportunity to be the best they can be, and one of the things I really stress is that they compete hard. Like, I think the only times I've yelled at my kids as a dad when they were younger was if I didn't think they were playing hard, or I didn't like. Well, that's not true with my son. I yelled at him all the time because he didn't do anything I asked him to do. JC did every single thing I asked her to do, and he'd be like, "Why don't you yell at JC?" Because she does everything I tell her to do. You do everything out. But anyway, getting back to that answer, what we tell our parents is that the most dangerous thing is the perception you have on how it's going to be. So, for example, your kid, you want your kid to be the leading scorer on the team. And maybe your son or daughter isn't the leading scorer, but maybe he or she is doing very well. And if you ask the coach, that kid's he's as important as any part of the team. But your perception and your son or daughter's perception was it was going to be up here. And it doesn't meet that perception, then it becomes a dangerous thing. You're not succeeding. You're not happy. You're not doing what this person's doing better. This person's scoring more. This person's catching all the passes. You're just running the patterns to clear out for the stud, or you're not making all the tackles, or you're not getting all the kills in volleyball, whatever. And really, your son or daughter might be doing a tremendous job. But because of the perception and the expectation that you had isn't met, it becomes a bad experience for everybody. And it becomes an experience that the parents don't enjoy, the athlete doesn't enjoy, the coach doesn't enjoy as much because there's some resistance and there's some fight. That I guess that would be my advice. Like, yes, still set the expectation high. Still, make sure they're competing hard. But just because you thought he or she was going to be the starting point guard and they're the backup point guard, or they don't handle the ball because the coach wants you out there because you can really defend, but there's someone that's better at handling the ball, that's okay. And make sure they reach that potential in that role and enjoy it and embrace it. Because if not, it turns into really a selfish expectation. But then again, you're fighting the selfish society we live in today too. And it's not easy, when I'm saying that in front of Dublin-Coffman parents and they're like looking at me, oh yeah, it's easy. Your daughter's playing at Ohio State. Like, yeah, it's easy for you to say that because her role was or your son's got that. But it's so true. Not that you just give in to mediocrity. I'm not saying that, but be careful on setting that expectation and that goal of so high because of everything you did as a parent and your son or daughter did. And when you don't reach that, it's not a failure. It's dangerous because you set it so high and it's not there, and now it's looked at as a failure, if that makes sense.
It makes sense. I think another way to put that is it should be about the kid as opposed to the parents' expectations. And the kid has to be, I think more times than not, kids, if you boil it down, kids, I think most often know kind of where the pecking order is if they're being brutally honest. Not that they always are, but I think a lot of times it's the parents that set that expectation, and then they're in the kid's ear all the time about, hey, why isn't this happening, this, that, the coach is wrong, blah, blah, blah. And then that's where, as you said, that's where you get into those difficulties instead of the kid looking at it and going, hey, I'm part of a great team. I have a role to play. And it's a challenge. And it's a challenge for all the reasons that we've talked about, just how different the game is and how different coaching is. And it's just been an evolution back from the 80s and 90s when you and I were picking up a ball and playing as opposed to being on the sideline coaching. So I want to leave it there, Duane. I want to give you a chance before we go. Let people know how they can find out more about what you're doing at Dublin-Coffman and just how people can reach out to you, whether you just want to share an email or social media, whatever, and then I'll jump back in and wrap things up.
Yeah, you could just go on the kaufmanathletics.net, which is our athletic website. If you want to reach out and email to me, feel free to do that. Talk basketball, talk sports, anything I can do to help out. And it's Dublin-Coffman's a big school. It actually kind of reminds me of Strongsville back when we were growing up, Mike. It's a booming suburb. The difference is we have 3 schools the size of Strongsville in Dublin, so it's crazy down here in Columbus. But it's a great place, and Columbus it's different. It's definitely different from Northeast Ohio, but it's a cool city and it's a neat city. But yeah, I'd love to talk with anyone that's interested. If I can help in any way, my door is always open. And thanks so much for having me. I enjoyed it and did a little catching up, I guess.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
no question. It was a lot of fun. I appreciate you taking the time. Like I said off the top, long overdue, and I can't thank you enough for taking the time. It was fun to reminisce and go back, and sometimes some of the things that it's funny, just the memories that you have and how one person's perception of it, and just thinking about the way that we grew up and the amount of time that we spent together playing both formally as a high school player and also just playing pickup basketball, and great times in life without question. And I can't thank you enough for taking the time, Duane. And to everyone out there, thanks for listening, and we will catch you on our next episode. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Hoop Heads podcast, presented by Head Start Basketball.